Welcome to the Albion TV feedback loop, relaying feedback on real issues facing real players. Today is May 19th, 2021. I am your host, The Chosen One, and today I will be joined by Robin Hood RS, Tazik, and Bogle. The purpose of the feedback loop is to address issues facing the community by bringing hot topics to the developers while also highlighting changes that your feedback has brought about. Today's topics will include ZVZ Meta. What's hot? What's not? Corrupted dungeons, changes, including proposed and other. And what's the deal with gathering? Can't I just transmute? But first, Bogle with the weather.
You're doing this? It's hot. I thought you were skipping this. Hello. Hello, guys.
I do have the full crew today. We have been looking at issues for the past 2 weeks, trying to find the best information out there to bring to you and to the developers. And we've got some good topics for you. I'm going to hand it off right away to Robin Hood RS, who will be looking at the ZVZ meta featuring the Grovekeeper changes and the Brimstone.
Yeah, it's been pretty hot over the last couple of weeks ever since the big change came in with the Grovekeeper nerf. Feedback from the general ZVZ community, especially the people that play the Grovekeeper, has been it hasn't been great. I've been one of them, but as we collected the feedback and people were voicing their opinions, because on paper, right, when the patch notes came in, like from going from 0.5 to 0.66 on paper, it didn't look too bad, right? Everyone was like,
Very
okay,
small, yeah.
like, and then people got their hands on the Grovekeeper after the change, especially during EU reset. People were able to like properly engage with the weapon. It wasn't good, and the feedback pretty much instantly came in. We were on Twitch, Reddit, multiple different discords, the official forums. Everywhere was like, Grovekeeper's dead, RIP, put it in the trash. And collected that feedback, because that's what I do. And I took it to
on an EU invasion, we saw a few, right? But
yeah
by NA, we saw none. They were just gone. They just disappeared out of the meta in an afternoon.
That exactly. It's like once people were able to have their hands on with it, like EU reset was the big one. Then going into NA, I think I saw like maybe 2 Grovekeepers like in like people's Zergs, when normally you see like 5 to 10. And people were just trying out different weapons to play with, but nothing worked, because in the tank line, the Grovekeeper is the ZVZ weapon. It's your go-to weapon. Nothing else really works. And you know, the indicator, it wasn't a big change. It's a good change. That makes sense. Every other major weapon in the game has an indicator on the ground letting people know, warning, this is where the damage, or this is where something's going to land. You have that chance to scurry away and get out of that zone, or at least have a countermeasure in place in that area. So that's a good change. I agree with that change 100%.
Yeah, and you talked to Retroman about that change as well as what he wanted to achieve with the overall changes to Grovekeeper, correct?
Yeah, and it kind of goes into what I just said. Like he wanted to have it so people could counter the Grovekeeper, or at least know what's coming.
Mm-hmm.
And the travel time, like it increased that just so drastically, where like you could read and watch someone fly through the air, land, and you'll be completely on like the other side of like the map already. Like it was a big change, and having that indicator there, really good. That travel time increase, not so good. And I went to Retro and I explained the Grovekeeper is the engagement weapon, and it's also a defensive weapon. So you need to have a quick reaction time. It needs to be pretty much instant, or you're just going to miss what you're trying to stop, right?
Right. And it's weird how just a small, what is it, 0.5 seconds, 0.6, 1.5 seconds, sorry. 0.15 seconds. I'll get this eventually, Robin. We'll get the math out there eventually. Just a small, tiny change, but the effect that it felt like was huge in play. It just didn't feel responsive. And that completely took it out of meta. That was not the intention. The intention was to simply open it up to counterplay, not remove it from the meta. And so the changes have already been reverted, coming with, what is it, patch 5 or patch 6?
I think it's patch 6 now, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And so that was a quick turnaround. Came in, we saw that it wasn't working as intended. Changes were made. Great to hear. But what about Brimstone? I understand you also did a lot of research on Brimstone to see how the player base feels about it, because it's currently one of the top damage dealing weapons in ZVZ.
Yeah, this was like a topic that Retro really wanted to have a little bit more of understanding on, and there it is, Mr. Tazik popping up with the Nerf Brimstone or no chat, and that's the big question, right? And the people that I spoke to, I popped in multiple different Discords, ZVZ guilds, NDA Discord, pretty much like anywhere I could find where people wanted to talk about it, and it was a very mixed bag. I mean, max spec with a brimstone when you're 700 out of 700 and you're 8.3, your DPS output without an armor boost is 2745 magical damage. That's without any boosts on top. That's the highest DPS output weapon in the game, but at the same time, chosen,
Yeah.
it's a very high risk, very
Hmm.
high rewarding weapon. You have a 3-second stand time, and also, because it takes so long to cast a weapon, most people use a Scholar Robe anyway, so you have no defensives. Because normally you're going to be running a Royal Hood, Royal Sandos, Scholar Robe, and where's your defensives? If you're burning your sprint to get into an engagement, you have nothing to come out. You have no defensives on like a Cleric Robe, for example, that most people will have in other DPS lines, because they don't need to reduce the cast time, right?
Hmm.
So very high risk, very high reward. But it also requires a lot of teamwork. It's
Yeah.
not your one
That's
shot
something I
pony, right?
noticed. Yeah, it's something that you really need to have teamwork with. It's not the same as like the Damnation staff was or a Gallipere is. You really need somebody else to help you do it, because you're completely defenseless. You're a glass cannon when it's all over with, and you don't have like the range of that, you know, the Damnation used to have, which was ridiculous. It's You need to have some assistance, and so it's interesting. I think it's in a tight spot, and I would like to hear more about that from the player base. We have a thread where you can respond. Bogle, can you go ahead and link that thread in chat right now so the players can go to it and let us know what their thoughts on Brimstone are? Because I think this is an interesting topic, but we need more data on it. We didn't get any really good, solid numbers on it, did we?
Not like it is like a general feedback, like I was just having to reach out and seeing what people were saying. And
Hmm.
like on the other side, like yes, it requires a lot of teamwork and it's a massive high output weapon itself. It's that rewarding, right? It feels good to use, and not a lot of other DPS weapons had that feeling or have that feeling. A lot of them's already been nerfed. Galas, for example, were like a one-shot pony, but that didn't require teamwork. You literally just got your stacks, you went in and you clapped and you killed 20 people. That's not that shouldn't be rewarded, that gameplay. But with a brimstone, you need multiple people. You need a couple tanks. You need a locust. You need an armor pierce. You need follow up DPS to finish those clumps. But that's only really at when high end ZVZ guilds fight other high end ZVZ guilds, right? When you're fighting a mid tier or low tier with this sort of damage output, you are literally one shotting everybody because they're in like 6-1 gear. Their IP isn't high. It's that's where it kind of comes into the like region of like that's not fun.
Right.
So how do you work that, right? Like what can you do to not make it one shot such a mid or lower tier player, but still
Hmm.
be rewarding at the end game for people that put in the effort and put in the high risk, to make their gameplay feel fun, because that's you don't want to take away the fun of a DPS player. Like
Right.
having that massive damage output, seeing those big clumps getting deleted, that's fun, right? That's what you live for. That's what you go to ZVZ for. But at the same time, no one wants to get one shot and then go back to town and then run a couple maps back out to a ZVZ in one shot. And it's a very it's very hard to
It's
try and
not a
balance this.
fun
And
gameplay loop to get into, and I think that's
yeah,
a lot about what we're talking about today is parts of the gameplay that don't work out well. And just like the Brimstone sending you home in one shot, which isn't a fun situation to be in, there are situations in Corrupted Dungeons, Robin, that are no fun to be in. I've been watching the recent meta changes with the quarterstaff line, the regen situation, and I've seen some engagements that are absolutely ridiculous, Robin. We've seen people have over 12 separate engagements over a 20-minute period, completely resetting the fight anytime they felt like they were in danger with no fear of repercussions because of the abilities on the quarterstaff and the regen power of plate combined with poison. It's really led to some very unfun gameplay mechanics. I think you would agree.
yeah, 100%. And this is going into topic number 2, right?
Yes, we're
Corrupted dungeons, the reset meta, and how certain changes can affect the wider game, like Windwolf,
mhm.
for example. But we will get into that. Let's jump into what the changes are coming forward, right? What are we going to be discussing here, Chosen?
Well, just like we were talking about before, or I wanted to touch on a little bit with the Brimstone, it's hard to balance things for multiple aspects of the game. It's hard to balance the Brimstone for both newer players and high end. It's also hard to balance lines like the quarterstaff for 1v1 gameplay and gameplay everywhere else. Because in the rest of the world, quarterstaffs were fine, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, they're
fine.
they're a huge part of 5v5 of 10v10. Even in ZVZ, you see them used, but it's was dominating in Corrupted Dungeons in a way that just wasn't fun for people, and it had to have some changes put in place. And there were changes to the quarterstaff line for the cartwheel, for stun run, lowering the speed buffs afterwards, and the length of time they lasted. But those changes alone weren't enough to stop that reset style of gameplay that we were seeing in Corrupted Dungeons, and more changes have been proposed. Changes including flattening the regen across all armor types for patch 6.
Yep. Well,
This
because
was a Go ahead.
it's like the plate armor, especially, right? It had a higher health regen compared to others,
Mhm.
and now we're just going to see flat across the board. Leather, plate, cloth, it's all going to be the same, and that's a good change.
Yeah, this was something that came up a lot when I talked to different Corrupted Dungeons players. They were saying either, cap the amount of regen that players would get, normalize it so everybody had the same one, or bring them closer in line just so that plate didn't have such an advantage. And Retroman is going with putting them all at the same rate, 150%. We'll see how that works. But he's also got a couple of other changes in place for patch 6 as well, including keeping players who use dots in combat as long as the people who receive dots, whether that's through, Vile Curse or through a poison potion. Now the person applying that potion or dot will stay in combat as long as the person receiving. So they both go into regen at the same time. Their combat timers will start at the same time. And that
Yeah,
will help out in a lot of this reset meta, which was stun somebody, throw a poison pot on them, and run away, and then go reset first. That was a very frustrating gameplay style to be in. Another change, healing cast inside of Corrupted Dungeons, Robin, 10% decrease across the board.
yeah, and that opens up to giving healers less sustain potential and encourage healers to actually DPS. You're not so much now going to be able to out sustain someone, but now it's like kind of like do some damage, fight the other person, because you are in a 1v1 corrupted dungeon. You're meant to be fighting that other person, doing damage, right? And this change is quite interesting. It's something that we haven't had before.
Mhm.
um like inside of a certain zone where it's only like, okay, this area you're getting a 10% debuff. Like it's going to be quite interesting going forward, I think, how that whole system is going to be used to change other aspects of the game, maybe
Mhm.
inside corrupted dungeons. I don't know if it could be worked with like CC, like
Mm.
healing movement, whatever. Like it's quite an interesting change. I think it's a good one, and I think we can note on here that lifesteal's not affected with this change, which
Right,
is
right.
pretty good.
Yeah, but it does affect your mercenary jacket because that
Yeah.
does straight up heal you every time you do damage. Another piece of armor that we should talk about: knight's armor. Wind wall
Yes.
duration, Robin, proposed to go from 4 seconds to 2 seconds because of how useful it is in corrupted dungeons. And this is one of those areas where you don't want to ruin its gameplay in other areas because it's totally fine there. Like you see, it's fine in ZVZ, it's fine in 5v5, but in the 1v1 situation, it needs to have some changes. So the proposal was to cut it in half. This was met with some righteous fury and furious anger. I don't know. The wind wall people were not happy, right?
Yeah, and it kind of like falls into the same aspect of like the Grovekeeper change. Like the outcry that we saw with the Grovekeeper, it had the same effect with the Knight armor. And I 100% agree. Like this change, bringing it from 4 down to 2, it just doesn't really make sense. It's gonna destroy it in the open world. In ZVZ, it's completely going to be completely useless. So Retro's already been gathering feedback already. There was some
Yes,
really
yes.
good suggestions on Reddit. The NDA Discord has also had a couple announcements made. And do you
Mhm.
want to jump on
Yeah,
that, Chosen?
there's a couple of different things he has talked about as options to change wind wall other than just reducing its time. One was to allow it to be double cast, such as the Soul Shaker on the Grail Seeker, where you can cast it twice if you do it right away, though it would make the cooldown for it longer. This would allow you to still use it in ZVZs, but not make it as useful in Corrupteds. But it, with such a short cooldown still, or a short wind wall still, it would make it very hard to get away in a ZVZ situation, right? So
Yeah.
the other proposal that he has is to turn it into an uninterruptible channel that would last 6 seconds. And every time an enemy is hit by the wind wall, the caster gets a resistances and crowd control resistance buff that would stack up to 5 times, allowing you to make that Hodor moment, where you stand there and just hold the door against your the Z force coming in, making a real active use spell where you have to be involved with it and actively work to get away afterwards. I mean, yeah, you'd have the bonuses to get away, but it wouldn't be as set it and forget it as Windwall
Yeah.
is now. You'd have to
Yeah.
really, plan when you use it.
And it's like a risk versus reward type playstyle as well. Like you're risking yourself, but you're like in a ZVZ standpoint, you're going to be saving your Zerg. If you're
Mhm.
standing there going, hold the door with the wind wall, and then yeah, there's a decent chance you can escape because you have some decent resistance buffs stacked up from your channel. So I think it's a very good change.
Yeah, I think that
And it fixes the issue inside corrupted
in
dungeons at the
Corrupted,
same
yeah.
time.
And we saw like feedback from the players in the NDA channel, and the majority of them thought this was a better direction to go,
Yep.
honestly. Yeah. Not everybody. So more thoughts are welcome. Please go to our forum and let us know what you think about these changes. And if there's another way you'd like this done, let us know. And another area they're looking for feedback on is the adding additional mobs to corrupted dungeons after a set amount of time in order to slow down the longer kiting strategies, the post 5 minute strategy, if you will, where you just keep resetting or run away from your opponent until they just get ground down. This would spawn mobs at the intersection that scream at the player that goes by first and just slows them. Simple as that. It would kind of just stop some of that ring around the rosy gameplay and give a small advantage to the chaser. But Bogle, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I kind of want to play that clip by Retro Man, and then we will let you guys start talking about a bit of gathering and transmutation.
Sure. Let's play that.
The balance changes we are making for patch 6, they're basically meant to improve the situation for corrupted dungeons in the short term, so rather soon, but they will not be enough to completely fix the whole reset meta situation. So while I hope it will be much better for players and especially much more fair that not certain classes like plate or dot classes have an unfair advantage, there will be still a future patch needed where we look at some of the mechanics of the corrupted dungeons to make it impossible to run around for like, say, 10, 15 minutes. So to a certain degree, a bit of resetting is actually good for the future resync. So because it allows you to, maybe you see your opponent and then you reset and adjust your spells. Or also what you can do is, if you had like a stupid mistake, you run into a trap or got hit by a mob, that you can reset and have a chance of a second engage, and it's not just this one encounter that decides everything. However, if you run around for like 10, 15 minutes and reset constantly, then that's definitely not the way we want this feature to be played. And one idea that we have been discussing right now that we could do, one concept first was the health regen that is limited, like battery, like you can restore 300% of your energy of your health once, and then it's gone. The problem there, like also some players point out, would be that it favors kiting playstyles a lot. So another approach would be that we could introduce a new mob that starts spawning at an invasion after like, say, 5 minutes or something has passed. And they basically would start spawning at intersections, making sure that players who keep running away forever get into combat. That's basically their main role. They wouldn't do much damage or anything. They would just follow you and hit you maybe, but just to make sure that you get into combat at some point again. And especially the person who runs away all the time has a disadvantage, right? Right now the traps and a lot of the other elements gives actually the advantage to the person who runs away. And these mobs could be a way how we give a disadvantage to the person who runs away forever. Like, but then they would only spawn after like 5 minutes or so to not interfere too much with like anything that is within the more normal corrupted dungeon fights where you have a few resets and a few engages and so on. So that meta shouldn't be changed. But if you keep running around forever, then we definitely would like to have a sudden death type of mechanic, right? That's basically what the idea is with these. But we were very interested in the feedback, what players think and what could be a good solution. And we're also looking at new players for NDA playtests, especially for corrupted dungeons, because we recently have been a bit low on corrupted dungeon players. So we want to get more voices of the corrupted dungeon player crowds into our NDA player group. So if you're interested, then please set a PM to Quokey.
All right. And I'm going to drop Quokey's information right here in chat for you. Go ahead and contact Quokey to get involved with the NDA playtest. We do need more members, specifically members to help playtest corrupted dungeons. Hey, Robin, while we were listening to that, you brought up an interesting fact. Do you want to share that with the audience?
Yeah, I'm seeing chat getting pretty hyped over the Grail Seeker, and I think everyone will be happy to know a Grail Seeker nerf is coming. I think it's not on the patch notes yet, but Retro Man has confirmed that the Grail Seeker is being nerfed, and look forward to the patch notes being updated soon with that and more info on that one. But I'm going to pass it over to Tazik and Bogle because transmutation and gathering time, boys.
Yeah, that was good to hear about the Grail Seeker there at the end. So
Yeah, I
now we're
like hearing
on
that.
the third topic. I will be joined by Bogle for this one. Bogle looking great there in the bottom right corner of your screen. Now, gathering and
Yeah,
transmutation is a large topic, Bogle, right? It's a really, really big topic that we can talk about for a long time. So instead, we're going to focus on the sort of overall scope of gathering itself, the issues that it may have right now, as well as transmutation. And we won't be going into any of the indirectly related issues like laborers and things like that. As we're talking, feel free to give some feedback in the chat based on what we're talking about, and we will be taking a look at that. Now, the main thing we want to start off with is mentioning the gameplay loop at the core of Albion. right? So at the core of Albion Online, you have this this loop of gathering, crafting, and fighting. Now you can skip it, right? There are a lot of different ways to skip one of the areas in this loop. You can buy your gear and go directly into fighting, right? But at some point, somebody else had to go one step before you in that loop and gather or craft.
Yeah,
Now
I
the
mean,
gathering system. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Bogle.
it's been a pretty I guess unique is too big of a word to use, but I heard a lot of people actually really like that gathering system, or generally how Albion does gathering, right?
Yeah, the way that Albion does gathering is very great. I know a lot of people love it. I know a lot of people give it a lot of props from even other games, in fact, right? Lots of people love gathering. I've seen a lot of the system, right? So we're specifically talking about the gathering system, but it's a great system, right? The ability to go out there with the different items, different tools to gather and cut down some logs, gather. It's a really good system, but there are a lot of issues with the mechanics, namely the nodes and the resources that are causing people a lot of headaches, and they're making it really unenjoyable
Headaches.
for some people to
Oh,
do
okay.
gathering in the end game.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, do you have to differentiate a lot there between people who have been doing it for a long time and people who have, just sort of just started? But I think some of the feedback we received was sort of towards the higher end game of the gathering loop, right? Um,
Mhm.
um, I don't think we need to talk and explain what gathering is, right? Because sort of everybody knows what.
People know what gathering is, right? A lot of people know. We're already having some people in chat saying, gathering in Albion is really fun. I agree with it.
Hmm.
But the issues that we want to talk about here are the mechanics that are making gathering feel less efficient than other alternatives like transmutation. Now, unlike gathering, people in chat might not know what transmutation is, right? Bogle, even I barely knew what it was 2 weeks ago before we researched this topic. So transmutation is this process where in a city at any refining station, you can take raw resources and pay a silver cost to either increase the tier, so that's from 4.2 to 5.2, or increase the enchantment level of the resource, so that's 5.2 to 5.3. And so what transmutation does is it's this equalizer, right? It's this balancing act, this gap closer in the market, where if there aren't these 7.2, 6.3 resources for you to buy from the auction house, or maybe if they're really high and expensive, you can instead buy lower tiered resources and then transmute them into that higher tier stuff. So the actual system of transmutation is good, right? It's a good mechanic to have in the game, but there have been some issues related to gathering and transmutation that is making people feel a little bit one-sided and leaning more towards transmutation, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Now, after we have the basics out of the way, we were looking in the forum thread initially, sort of for the direction of, is gathering worth it, and is the balance of both transmutation and gathering sort of in line? And we're looking feedback for these two areas.
Yep.
Now, before you go into the idea of what is worth, it's really hard to define that, because what that means is very different to very many players. And you can break it down to that monetary value of silver, and maybe gathering income or silver income per hour. And based on what I heard, and I'm open for suggestions there, is that on the very top end of the range, it can range somewhere from 2 to 4 million silver an hour if you have the perfect setup, right? For example, if you gather right after downtime, or if you have your guild group and you manage to hunt down one of the resource bosses in the Roads of Avalon, for example, then the payoff can be quite good. But if you look on the very low end, like, fresh off the boat, not even a tier 5 tool, then you're looking at, I don't know, 100K an hour?
Yeah,
Less?
nothing, right?
Yeah.
You don't make anything doing gathering at that low end. It's really unprofitable. It's a lot of time wasted to even get a premium. It's a lot of hours to pay for premium doing gathering at the low end there.
Yeah, the only thing that's different between high and low is that you have to somehow account for fame. And what fame is valued at is really hard to put in there.
And,
But in terms of silver, it's a difference.
And I do agree, right? So a lot of the chat's already picking up on the next sort of point that we were going to talk about, which is that resource distribution and also how you find the resources, right? A lot of the times you find a rare 6.3, it might only have 1 or 2 ticks and then it's gone again. Unless you show up at a server reset, right? As we were talking about earlier, when you show up at server reset, a lot of people aren't playing. There's a lot less gatherers out, and you can find those rare resources a lot easier and get
But
a
not
lot more
everybody
money
has
per
the
hour.
time. Yeah.
But not everyone can wake up at that time to do it. And then when everyone does wake up, those nodes are gone, and now the gathering feels pretty less efficient than just sitting in the town and buying those T4 resources, right? And so I think after hearing all of that, Bogle, right, is a gathering worth the time investment from a macro perspective? What do you think?
Excluding the fame idea and the idea of progress, which I think is very well worth it. The monetary thing starts to pick up very late after a very how to say high level of investment and time.
Yeah.
So much so that I think the majority of people who go out and try that go, yeah, maybe not.
Mm-hmm. And so what happens is people decide not to gather at the high end. They don't gather those rare resources. And so instead, they have to get them from transmutation, right? But in order to fund that, in order to actually get the rare resources through transmutation, not only do you have to pay a silver cost to get the T4 materials, unless you gather it yourself, you also have to pay a silver cost to transmute it, right? So that silver does have to come from somewhere. And so that's sort of the next thing to talk about, which is that people are gathering in mass. A lot of people have been telling us, rather, that a lot of these newer players are mass gathering the T4, getting their first premiums from the starting zones. And then the end game players have been saying that they buy it from them, get that T4, and then go and transmute it. And that's how, instead of gathering, they're getting their end game resources, right? And so now what we can talk about, Bogle, is actually why transmutation is used, right? And why it's more efficient than gathering, or it feels that way right now, right?
Yeah,
so
I mean,
go ahead.
The base idea is that finding rare stuff is hard, right? And you always look for ways to make that better, either by, living with a group or having an optimized time or build to do it. But transmutation comes in at that intersection and sort of, as weird as it sounds, partially it doesn't make you go out as much. I don't know how to phrase that best, right? Because I want to be careful, because there's a ton of people actually gathering high tier materials and all of that. But if you mix the idea that what transmutation is, that you can sort of spawn resources, if you break it down, then and you compare that to actually going out there, taking the gear, taking a risk, then you're getting very close to some of the trade-off position where you think, yeah, maybe it's just better to either straight up buy it or transmute it up. And then it's, is it more efficient? It's so hard to say, because it's you're not doing it, but at the same time you're getting the resource, you're generating that item you need.
So it's really a question of this, right, Bogle? Let's say you need a ton of 7.3 resources, right? Is it more efficient to go out and gather it right now, or is it more efficient to buy some T4 resources and transmute it? And I think right now in the end game specifically, a lot of it is that transmutation play. A lot of them are just buying the T4 and transmuting it. And it's because it's an equalizer, right? It's that gap in the market that transmutation is able to solve, because there isn't a lot of high-end resources being gathered in the game, in the end game specifically, and even mid game, right?
I mean, yeah, that brings us back to the idea that you still have to get that silver somehow, and that's the tricky part mostly. You can't just make that one sort of lane statement that you say, well, if you don't want to gather, you just transmute, because you have to do something else instead.
You have to get the silver to transmute in the first place. Exactly.
Yeah.
And so that brings us into the whole idea of, if you do have that silver to invest, and if you know your numbers really well, then you can create these resources a lot cheaper than buying them from the auction house, right? Because they do exist on the auction house, but you can get them for cheaper if you know your numbers. And Vogel, why don't you take this topic over, show your chart, and go ahead and explain that?
Right. I mean, just saying you can make it cheaper is not as easy, because the way it's designed, it's a way to equalize and to sort of put a cap on the resource prices. I want to show a little chart just briefly, you guys can take a screenshot if you want. But this is the resource prices that come out at the end if you transmute something up from buying raw flat 4 at 2,800 gold. And if you compare these prices, I don't want to leave it up too long, but if you compare that with the actual market prices in game, then it turns out that most of the lower tier resources are actually cheaper than it costs to transmute them. The interesting levels are starting around 7.1, 7.2, 8.1, 8.2, sometimes tier 8 flat as well, where the price is actually right at the transmutation price point.
Yeah.
So,
And
and that
sorry, go ahead.
suggests that some of the supply that is coming from that
Right.
is not coming from the game itself, but more from the transmutation sort of avenue based on the price. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so what that does is it brings us to the idea that, is this system okay, right? And remember, we're talking specifically about gathering and transmutation and not the indirect other ways to get silver, right? Is the system okay, right? Is it okay to stay like this? And I think the transmutation system is working, right? I don't think you can delete or nerf or completely change the silver cost, right? Maybe some nerfs to the silver price to transmute might help, but really where we should focus on is actually making gathering feel efficient again, right? And making it maybe some more nodes, maybe some more distribution in the resources in the open world, things to help people get back into the open world and gather more. What do you think about that, Bogle?
Yeah, solutions are tricky. I agree. Getting people out there is always the best thing. Somehow, getting people more out there. I also agree that it has its place in the economy. It's a balancer. I sort of see it that the price point should be looked at because it seems like it should be like the worst solution that you have and not the de facto standard for 8.2, 8.3 that it has been for a long time. And I see the weird feeling of hard capping gathering profits.
Yeah.
As one of the other issues. Because if you do the math, you basically know how much you can earn gathering at the highest possible rate. Like if you know how many, tier 3, tier 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 nodes you can find roughly in an hour, then you can never outcompete the transmutation cap, basically. And that seems like it could be moved up a little bit based on everybody saying, yeah, it's not quite worth it. Yeah. And the other part that I want to bring up is whether or not it's okay to quote unquote just be able to print high tier resource. I mean,
right,
it's
so one
dangerous
thing to keep
because
in mind, right?
Yeah.
So sorry to cut you off, right? But one thing to keep in mind with that printing topic is that you aren't just generating these resources for nothing. We keep mentioning this because it's really important, right? You're not just printing them; you really are spawning them. You're creating them out of nothing. Well, it's not actually nothing because you're creating them out of a T4 or a T5 or something else in silver, right? So there is a cost because you have to get that silver from somewhere else. You have to have done other activities to have gotten that silver. And so that ties into the whole aspect of that gameplay loop where transmutation is in some way kind of removing gathering from that from the loop, right? Instead of being gathering, crafting, fighting, now you're doing other things to transmute, to craft, to fight instead. And it's a big change because gathering is a big part of the game. And it's leading to a lack of a presence in the open world along with a ton of other issues that we won't talk about in this show, right, Vogel?
I mean, I think it's fine to address it. I think it's because it's a major point of how you run a guild or how you manage your resource income. And I think it's a pretty important topic to at least think about from a guild level. But yeah, is it too powerful? I don't know.
I don't know. It's really for the chat. Go ahead and give your thoughts on that, right? And we'll forward that. Make sure all the feedback gets given.
I have
to people it's needed.
one last comment that I wanted to make that I think not a lot of people have thought about is the idea that let's say you're a guild who has a hideout in the Outlands, and you want to for some reason craft 8.2, 8.3 gear in that hideout. Now, if you think about how to get these 8.3 resources there, then buying flat tier 4 in a city, moving that to your hideout and then transmuting it up is one of the possible routes. which comes with a way lower risk than buying the 8-3 in the city, having that risk of transportation, and then using it in your hideout, or even, you know, buying the made 8.3 gear. And the risk is like 10x or something ish.
Yeah,
Maybe
something like that.
So that convenience of having lower risk, or that transportation conundrum that you run into, is also something that I think should be looked at. And I don't know if it's as easy to say, well, you might have different transportation rules or transmutation rules in the hideouts or something. I think that's a very, very tricky topic. And yeah, that's my last point I had.
Yeah, the whole topic, right? The entire idea of transmutation and gathering and getting them to be in better states than they are now is a super tricky topic, right? And that's why it takes a long time to go over. And there's a lot of stuff we couldn't go over, a lot of indirectly and directly related aspects that we might talk about on a different show. But for now, these 3 topics are all that we had on this first little pilot of the community feedback show. If you have any other suggestions or feedback on the 3 topics we mentioned so far, there is a forum link that Robin just put in the chat. Go ahead and click on that, post on the forums. All the feedback is going to be given directly to developers and the people who need to see it to get these issues fixed. But Chosen, why don't you go ahead and talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, go ahead and post them your thoughts into our forum post over here. I believe Robin just linked it in chat. We're going to be talking with the developers on a regular basis, going over ideas which can fit onto the show and be discussed in a short period of time, and see what they can have feedback on and what they can fix right away, as well as finding things that we believe are important to bring in front of the developers to make sure that they're aware of them. Now, not everything's going to make it onto the show, guys, but we're going to try to get as many things in front of the developers as possible that you guys link in those forum posts. So if you have an idea somewhere else in suggestions or in bugs or somewhere else in the forums, drop a link to that message in our forum post or write a new one, and we'll take a look at it and we'll try to get it in front of the right people to look at the problems.
But I believe that is all we have for the first episode of the community feedback show.
Yeah, just one thing left to do, Kazik.
And what is that? The old-fashioned, the classic?
Yeah. I'm gonna pull a
Give
couple
them
raffles.
a little bit of gold. Pull some raffles. Okay.
We have 3 winners. Mr. ZMR DKR AKONS. Somebody else pronounce that one?
That's on you, Tazik, there.
Mr. Dekrakranos, obviously.
Okay, that makes perfect sense.
That guy
And
blasted his keyboard.
Pepega, not Mega, has won the raffle, and I'm Hard Worker B has won the raffle. Please try to whisper me right here in Twitch, and we'll try to get you a gold code in the next 24 hours or so. All right, does anybody have anything else they really want to say before we head out of here? I think we have a lot of feedback to go over in chat.
Yep.
We'll have to read that later and try to bring it to the developers. As well as, I think it went pretty well as far as giving information to the players on some
I
of the
think it was a
changes that
great
are proposed.
show. I know a lot of people came in a little late into the show, so to quickly recap, the 3 topics we went over were the Zvz Meta, sort of Brimstone and Grovekeeper talking, and small-scale PvP. So that was mostly about cryptid dungeons, and then at the end there we were talking about gathering and transmutation. And
and also
Bakinen,
a
we will
couple of
get on
nerfs
that.
as well. Growseeker is being changed. Once again, I want to
big announcement.
Yeah, Growseeker change coming, boys.
Last thing is left to do is tell people what AlbionTV has for schedule for the weekend, and then we're done, guys.
All right. This weekend we will be back at 18 UTC, correct? DBZ show?
Yep, on the Saturday.
Yep. Followed by 20v20s and 5v5s.
And then on Sunday, I'm trying to think of our schedule here because it moves around quite a bit. We do have the 20 versus 20s on Sunday, right?
Yeah, it's Sunday.
Yeah. And also the new Hellgate showcase on Sunday as well. And if you haven't seen it already, go check it out. I mean, it's a brand new show for us as well, like this one. It's been extremely fun, joined by Tazik and Chosen, going over 10v10 and 5v5 action inside Hellgates, breaking down the fights as well. It's something that we haven't done before on AOTV. So, breaking down fights, highlighting certain areas where things swung in favor of people, or, a misplay coming in here is something that you may not have seen live in the action. But yeah, check it out. Or you can check out our YouTube channel, youtube.com/AlbionTV, where you can find all our past shows. But yeah, I think that's it.
Well, we have one other thing coming up on
Oh.
Sunday that you failed to mention. Another
God,
interview.
what?
Interview at 20 UTC.
And who's that with?
Durenton.
Ooh, that's gonna be a good one.
Yeah,
That's
of
good
the
healer to
Purple
talk to.
Cobras.
Yep.
I asked him some juicy questions. He has some juicy answers. Not all the questions I asked him made it into the show, though. Some of them were just too juicy.
All right.
Where'd your teammates go?
Well, I think that's all we have for the show today. You can catch us live again on Saturday. And yeah, have a good day, everybody.
See you soon. We're out.
See you later.